Hey, welcome to The Warp. I'm Jack Rita with Future Pastimes. In this video, I'm going to be talking about designing aliens for Cosmic Encounter. A lot of people ask me what the process is. How does one go about designing aliens? And every time an expansion comes out for Cosmic Encounter, and there have been 7 now in the Fantasy Flight edition, there's a flurry of people inspired to design their own aliens. And this is a game that has had a long, long history of homebrew alien design, for good or for bad. Going back 40 years, people coming up with their own. When Cosmic Encounter was first published by Eon, they had a newsletter that people would write letters with questions about aliens, but a lot of times they were submitting their own aliens. So the homebrew thing has been around since Cosmic Encounter has been around since the late 70s. So there's a number of things that I've written about in the past, and there's a link to a couple of those in the description. One is just some things that scream this is going to be a bad homebrew that you should take into account as you are brewing your own homebrew aliens, and some other stuff that I get into playtesting aliens, because that's really where you determine whether a design has legs or makes sense at this point. But there's a lot of other things that go into designing aliens. In Future Pastimes, we continue to design aliens for Cosmic Encounter. Whether they'll ever be published remains to be seen, but it's fun for us to do. We can use those aliens in our tabletop simulator version of Cosmic Encounter, so new aliens start popping up. And with Cosmic Odyssey's alternate timeline aliens becoming an official thing, a lot of players have revisited old aliens that they either didn't like or thought were too weak or overpowered, and have been redesigning those as alternate timeline versions of the original aliens. In some cases, completely changing the alien, and so a lot of people do that. There's also a link to The Warp, which is the website that I've been maintaining for decades, and it has a database of over 2,000 aliens at this point, most of which are homebrew aliens. And I try to credit the designers whenever it's obvious who that is. So you can search by designer, you can search by the different published versions. So the aliens from the Eon and the Mayfair, Cosmic Encounter Online, et cetera, are in there as well. Haven't added the Odyssey stuff in there because the Warp is undergoing a long, slow transition into hopefully a better version of itself. But it progresses very slowly, so I don't know when that's ever going to happen. But eventually our plan is to get those aliens in there, along with the dozens and dozens and dozens of homebrews that have popped up over the last year or two. That's about the time I stopped adding aliens to the Warp, but there have been a lot that have come up with. So a lot of people on Board Game Geek, as well as the Cosmic Encounter Coliseum Discord, coming up with their own homebrews and play testing them. So a couple of pointers in this video that are not necessarily part of those links, just some philosophical approaches. I would say the first thing that has always been a factor in designing an alien is being in a game of Cosmic Encounter and wanting to be able to do something that you technically can't do. And that has been something that Peter Olaka has used as inspiration for designing aliens for a long time. Just saying, I really wish I could just, point the hyperspace gate somewhere else. That ended up becoming an alien. So it's those sorts of things. Looking for the things that you can't do in Cosmic Encounter that you might want to do is a good place to start. The other side of that is just taking a concept and trying to find game mechanisms that are inspired by that concept and can help it. So that is the other thing that Peter Olaka likes to do, is when he hears the name of something, he wonders, could that be a Cosmic Encounter alien? The whatever power to do something. And a lot of aliens have popped up because of that. The one that always comes to mind for me is the Geek. We were having a conversation one day about Board Game Geek, and Peter said, we need an alien called the Geek. And I said, challenge accepted. And I went home, and that night I came up with the alien that is now part of Cosmic Odyssey, the Geek. And so it was the name that inspired some kind of effect that could marry well with that. And I think it worked out pretty well. It's one of my favorite aliens in Cosmic Odyssey. It's an alien definitely for big time cosmic nerds, because it's really like cosmic trivia rolled into an alien. So those are the main areas that we get into. But one of the things that you need to watch out for, especially nowadays when you've got a catalog of well over 200 published aliens and over 2,000 different crazy ideas out there, there's definitely some overlap in a lot of those aliens, but there's a lot of ideas out there that aren't even in the warp. So I think there's well over 2,000. Is the tendency to want to try to do too much with an alien. A lot of the aliens, your first 75 that were designed, many of which have a very simple, straightforward concept. At times that alien is going to seem like it's kind of weak, but there will be moments when it really does shine. And the tendency nowadays is for a lot of people to just get into, like, I want to get a really powerful effect. I don't want it to have a weakness. I don't want it to have an Achilles heel. But I think that's not really in the heart of how Cosmic works. You can have some overpowered aliens, and Cosmic famously is the game that self-balances by and large because of the other players. The table will account for it. So it was never a priority for Future Pastimes to say this needs to be a well-balanced alien, although I personally try to keep that in the forefront of my design. I want to make sure that it does something interesting, original, but I don't want it to be overpowered. The other thing that happens is a lot of times now aliens have to have really long descriptions, and that is because they are accounting for a lot of edge cases. And certainly some of the original aliens, had they been designed now, they wouldn't necessarily be as pithy as they are, because they were grandfathered in. So they don't have to worry about other effects. The other effects have to worry about them. So it's kind of a strange place to be in designing new stuff for Cosmic Encounter, is because you're trying to account for other aliens or other effects that will be seeing some overlap with that alien, especially unusual cases, as well as the other variants. How does this interact with Lux or with moons or with space stations or technology? Anytime you have something that deals with your ship numbers or ship values, you have to say, how does this affect technology? If it counts as more than one ship, does that mean that you can research something more quickly if you're using tech, or something like evolutions? Does it mean that you shouldn't use it with those variants? Ideally, you're coming up with an alien that plays well with all the other aliens. But an alien like Masochist is notorious for messing with other game effects, where you're like, oh, what if Masochist is in the game? Now we have to figure out how to deal with that. And do we write a clause into the alien description that accounts for it or tries to deal with it in some way that has closure and doesn't require an FAQ? It's not easy. And I think, honestly, the original designers of Cosmic Encounter, they worry less and less about that sort of thing. They're at the point where they're ready to say, players will figure it out. They'll come up with some way to resolve this. We don't have to answer everything for them right away. And sure, they've been at this for a while, so maybe they can get away with that sort of thing. It's not the sort of thing that I feel comfortable with necessarily. In some cases, I think, if somebody doesn't know right away what to do in certain situations, I think that they're usually smart enough to figure out some kind of way to resolve it. There's usually some precedent that they can look at. Often there's more than one precedent, so you could go in a couple of different ways, and maybe the timing rule is your best way to deal with it. There's no easy answer on that. So I keep a database of all of the aliens that have been published, and I break it down into a lot of the effects that they do. So this is a a card, not a card, this is an alien that will let you gain a card, or this is an alien that lets you discard a card. This is an alien that gives you a bonus in an encounter to your encounter totals. This is an alien that interacts with rewards. This is an alien that interacts with reinforcements. So there are a lot. There's probably 30 or 40 different categories. And some aliens will check multiple boxes. Like this is an alien that will get you a colony and a card and let you discard. And then I can keep track of all the numbers and I can say, all right, there are 33 aliens that do this. So I really don't think we need any more aliens that have that effect. So let's try to avoid it. Sometimes you still are going to go there because things like gaining cards, it's something everybody wants to be able to do in Cosmic Encounter. And if there's a new way that you can do it, then it still feels like it's fresh. This is an alien that's going to, increase your encounter totals. Well, as long as it's doing it in a new and interesting way. If it's just multiplying, and maybe it's too much like virus or multitude. So you don't necessarily want to have another alien that does that. So I look at those and I look for the areas where there are low numbers, and then I try to think of, is there something else that can interact with that element of the game in a new and interesting way. A lot of the aliens that I've designed over the last couple of expansions, I've tried to do stuff that no alien does at all, and that's what really interests me, even to the point where the alien feels like it's playing the game in a completely different way. And I think Reactor is an example of that. It's very unusual gameplay. It's not an easy alien to win with. So if you're going to pick it to play, it's because you're looking for the challenge, or you're looking to subvert expectations or try something out that you don't normally get to do in Cosmic Encounter. And so that interests me a lot. And a lot of the alternate win aliens, I think, do that, or it's a great element for exploring new effects in the game. So somebody that's trying to do something to win the game that normally you don't try to do. And that I find interesting at this point in the design process as well. So how do you apply this sort of thing to other games other than Cosmic Encounter? A lot of it has to do with just testing things out in a playtest environment. And you can't be satisfied with one go. So even a good design can have a bad game, and a bad design can have a good game. You got to put it through its paces a few times. So anytime you have a game that has the variable player power mechanism in there, which Cosmic Encounter is pretty much the game that invented that, you're going to be looking for how to find a balance. And I know that I recently, just talked about the fact that the other designers don't care about balance. I think they lucked out in that Cosmic Encounter self-balances in a lot of ways. But I certainly still look at balancing things as much as possible, and I recommend it for other players. So you're looking for, all right, here is an effect that I can do in a game that other players will not be able to do, and trying to see, okay, is this something that is going to help me an inordinate amount of times? Am I going to just always win? Does it require other certain effects in the game in order to be tempered? Or is it something that the other players can account for irrespective of what their unique effects are, or the other effects that are part of the game? So there's no real, here's the process that you do to apply to this. It's going to be trial and error for sure. But I think the fact that a game, especially one that has more than 3 players in it, you can usually have some kind of balancing within the table. But again, it's going to really depend on what kind of game it is. If it's a game that has an unofficial alliance element to it, Cosmic Encounter, it's kind of blurs the line between official and unofficial. It's an official one, but it's temporary. Whereas with Dune, it's an official alliance that you can form that is still possibly temporary, but lasts longer. But other games can have kind of an unspoken alliance. So, our game Arrakis, you can make formal alliances, but until that time, you can say, look, we agree to not attack each other in order to strengthen certain borders against a stronger player. So we haven't formed an alliance per se, but we have an agreement that we're going to work together to either try to stop a more powerful player or to at least not exacerbate our situation by also attacking each other. So does your game have that sort of thing where you can allow for that? If a player has an individual player power that can dominate the game, do the other players have recourse to deal with that? So you're the only one that's going to be able to answer that one. And then looking at whether or not you can have a formal alliance element. But keep in mind, anything that it can have a formal alliance means that the two strongest players can team up. And how do you deal with that? It's certainly something that can happen in Cosmic Encounter. You get the situation where the two players at 4 colonies say, yes, we're going to ally with each other and try to win the game together. And that happens in Dune as well, where the two strongest factions, they're both in 2 strongholds, and they say, we just need to last to the end of this next turn once we form the alliance. That's usually how it works out. So how does the game react to that sort of thing? And is it a foregone conclusion that the strongest players or the strongest power in a game is just going to win all the time? And playtesting is really the only way that you're gonna find that out. Now, Tabletop Simulator is, I think, a great environment for playtesting. It really allows you to add components, whether they're have a nice design element to them or they're very raw. You can bring those in, and then you can bring in players from literally around the world to try to test those things out. I've gone to conventions with games to playtest, and I've gone to playtest other people's games at conventions. And when I'm looking at a game where everything is handwritten on old business cards, which is usually how I've start off with my interior testing prototypes, versus somebody who has got some temporary art and some nicer looking components, you're more likely to get playtesters when stuff looks nice, even if you're like, this is definitely not the final art, or this is art that I've cribbed off of the internet just so that I can have a sense of this is the kind of art that I want to have in the game. Then you're more likely to get some people to sit down and spend their time giving you some feedback and trying that game out. But I go through, when I'm playtesting, I literally draw it out on business cards and I spread it out on the table and I pretend to be 3 or 4 different people playing the game. And I need to get that to a certain point before I show it to my friends or family or neighbors or what have you. And then once I've solidified some of the game mechanics and elements of gameplay, then I start to make better quality components so that I can bring them out to strangers and people whose opinion I really want to get. And I don't want them to start dreading the whole playtest experience because of how cruddy the components look. So I think that's a factor as well, especially if you're not a renowned game designer, which I'm not either. So it's a process, and I'm hoping to playtest something at a convention coming up. But I put together some fairly nice looking components so that I can get people, to come to the table and sit down and say, this looks interesting. What is it? And then I can say, yeah, all right, great. Let's try it out and see what you think. So let me know if you have specific questions. This is a little bit esoteric. It's kind of abstract. In terms of Cosmic Encounter, it's pretty straightforward, and a lot of the stuff that you're going to want to know, you can read in those articles. But ask me questions if you have some on there, and yeah, get people together to play test it and see what they think, and try it out in a lot of different environments, different player counts, other variants in there, a mix of classic aliens as well as the new aliens, not just all new aliens, but see how it works in those different environments and look for trends. That's the real thing with playtesting, is you're looking for trends and common denominators. And like, this seems to be, everyone seems to enjoy this element, or a lot of people complain about the same things. That lets you know, all right, this is where I need to put my focus and my energy. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.